Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's a pleasure to be here with you for another week. It is Thursday, May 18th, around 9:22 p.m. And this week, I'm going to circle back to a topic that I was asked to discuss maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago before I decided to take a turn and talk about our children and autism and all the challenges they face. So sit back, relax, get ready, and I'll be right back. So welcome back to the 247 Real Talk podcast. Once again, I'm Julian Perry, I'm your host, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. You hear me sniffling a bit. I had this past weekend, I caught a pretty serious virus that I was struggling with. Not sure exactly what it was, but it was coughing, it was congestion, it was in the beginning I was a bit nauseous, and finally got over it, only to in turn get several people in my household sick with it, my wife and my kids. So I guess there's something going around. It caught me first. It's caused me to rethink. I was one of these people who, until maybe 2.5 weeks ago, was still wearing a mask on the railroad and in crowded places. And I finally succumbed to peer pressure, so to speak, and I took it off. And after this weekend, how I felt, it's back on. Some people understand it. There are a decent amount of people on the trains and the railroads who still wear a mask. And then there are people who look at me like I'm crazy, like, are you still wearing a mask? Well, yes, I am, and it's back in full effect. But this week's podcast is not a long episode. I know. I usually say that, and it goes on longer than I intend, but it really isn't, because this is not a topic I want to beat into the ground. I've had numerous, probably 5 or 6 previous podcast episodes talking about gun violence. What's amazing is that we are in May. We haven't hit Memorial Day yet in 2023, and we've had what the media at least is calling over 200 mass shootings. Now, I don't want to pick hairs here. I don't think that number is completely accurate, because I think the definition of mass shootings is what can be manipulated like anything else that the media does. And I'm not saying this in the way you're maybe thinking. I am appalled at the mass shootings, even if it's one. I am disgusted by it. I am tired of it. I cringe when I hear the news. It was so many that I didn't really get to break down or do the breakdown I wanted to do, because there's the political aspect of this, right? There's a gun control aspect of this, and then there's also what seems to be a mixture of mental illness, emotional imbalance, domestic violence, and unfortunately, in this process, I'm not sure how many years compared. I have to do that research as well, but we've lost a lot of children this year. And some of them are not necessarily related to like school shootings. Some of them are in families, right? When I think about the school shootings, I think about one that happened not too long ago where the teacher went back to the school. I believe there was like 9 kids shot. But the bottom line is, this is just another reflection of how much we are manipulated. And hear me here's what I'm saying. When I say manipulated, I mean that this is something that our government, whether you're Republican or Democrat, should be focused on solving. What has been happening politically lately is there's been a number of stupid distractions, whether it be court cases, whether it be fights for positions in the House of Representatives, whether it be congressmen who should be expelled. There's so many different things going on that are completely outside of why we hire politicians. Now, I'm not saying these things are not valid. You've heard me talk about it, especially about, and I'll say his name, George Santos, the congressman from New York who should be expelled, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's a matter of decency, right? In terms of how we got there, the lies that were told, the deception that was told, even the people who voted for him. If you are a Republican, you should be angry because even as a Republican, you want to elect someone who not only supports your ideology, but you also want to have someone who represents you with dignity and respect. This is a man who, after denying and running around and turning and twisting, made a deal with the Brazilian government to settle a case where he stole $1,300 off someone's credit card, I believe, and used it for niceties. I think he has a 13 count federal indictment against him that once again talks about stolen funds and embellishment and his own niceties. And the point I'm making is not to stick on George Santos, but it's to say that we, the people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, whatever you are, we need help. We need politicians who will go into the office, have meaningful debates, and come out with solutions that benefit most Americans. Not most Democrats, not most Republicans, but most Americans. We are Americans first before we choose a political ideology. Instead, they've got us in their grips. We've got a former president who has some court cases, and we've got supporters of his who are threatening and sending letters with substances to political officials and threatening lives of judges for someone who probably doesn't even know their name or care to know their name. What is wrong with us as human beings? When did we become so hateful? And this goes right into the argument again of the mass shootings and the gun violence. Families being wiped out. There was one case, and it's been a long day, so my memory might not be right just the exact locations, but if I mention the case, you'll know what I'm talking about, where the guy was shooting in his backyard, and the neighbor came over and asked him if he could, not shoot or whatever because the noise of the shooting was waking up his young kids, and his response was to go next door and kill 5 people in that family, including young children shot in the head. What kind of human being looks at a child and pulls the trigger with ease? 5 people, and then he went on the run. So, what kind of anger and hatred lives inside someone like that? We have to. I don't know what to do. I don't know if you sense the frustration in my voice, but I am so not only disappointed but perturbed about where we are going as human beings. A teacher, someone who took the oath and promise of rearing young minds, goes to a school and kids, and shoots school children. The attempted shootings. There was one the other day where kids were playing on someone's front lawn, and he came out and he shot. I think one child was hit. There's the one where I think his last name was Jarl, that went up to the door of the wrong house to pick up his siblings, thinking that was the babysitter's house. He'd mixed up drive and street, the 2 names, and he went to the wrong house on the wrong block, and the man shot through the door, hit him once in his head, once in his arm. He's lucky to be alive. There are criminals out there who, in the days when I was a young kid, criminals were hiding from the police and trying to do their things in the darkness. These criminals today are bold and brazen. They go face the police and shoot at the police. Not as a one off, but as a it's part of the society we live in now. Every single day, I pray for my kids before they leave to go to school. I pray that they're safe on the school bus. I pray that they're safe in school. Now, I never thought growing up that I would have to pray for my kids to be safe in school from shootings. I want, I can imagine praying for them to be safe from, any falls and hurting themselves. Pray for them to be safe when they're playing on the playground, not to fall off something and break a leg or break an arm. Pray for their safety when they're running with other kids in the classroom, not to run with scissors or a pencil, right? Those are the things our parents warn us about. Hey, Julian, don't run with those scissors in the hand. Hey, Julian, don't hand me those scissors with the point to me. Hey, Julian, take that pencil point out your hand. Don't run with it like that. Those were the fears of our parents. But my fears for my kids are different. When you hear of a school being shot up, when it hasn't hit home because it's not your kid's school, it seems so far away. But if you look across this country as to how many times this happened, you realize that it can happen anywhere at any time. And our politicians are so divided. It's one thing to be divided. It's another thing to work with intent to remain divided, which is what I see. When you have kids being shot in school, when you have two opposing views as to how to keep them safe, you're supposed to sit down like human beings and get to a place very quickly that everyone can live with, that keeps most kids safe, or all kids safe, as a matter of fact, or to the best of your ability. That's why I said most, for every single school around the United States of America. Are those conversations happening? No. One person is way off in the far left and one person is way off in the far right, and no one wants to come in the middle because they have to do their political grandstanding. For whom? How many of you out there were 70, let me get this right, 82 million votes for Biden and 70-something million for President Trump. So let's say 100, over 150 million votes. Out of 150 million people who voted, how many of you truly believe that it's okay to have your kids' lives hanging in the balance in school because your political ideology is more important? Whatever nonsense these politicians come out with, number one. So let's take a step back because this affects the entire environment with the gun violence and everything else. We have politicians that come out and say some really dumb crap. I often wonder, maybe there needs to be a test, a written test to qualify to become a politician to even run for office. Because the dumb crap that comes out of some of these politicians' mouths, my kids could do better. My 7-year-old will put them to shame. But they come out and that's not really the bad part. I mean, it's bad enough they come out and say it, but then because we have bases that are so divided and so focused on the ideology rather than focus on uniting and making America better, whatever dumb nonsense the person comes out with, if they're popular, their whole base sits down, at least publicly. Publicly, they go out in public and support that nonsense. I suspect, much like what happened at Fox News and with Tucker Carlson and the Dominion lawsuit, that probably I'd like to believe in humanity and believe that most of the people who publicly support the nonsense have a different point of view in the privacy of their own homes. And they're probably doing it for a political show. I have to believe that. I can't believe that that's how much our brains have been eroded and degraded, that we can't think in a rational, common sense manner anymore, irrespective of a political ideology, irrespective of what person or party you support. And these are difficult times. I'm not talking about financial times. I'm talking about we're in a world that has changed from when we were children. I'm talking about a world that offers more challenges as we face more evolution of humankind and how we live. I'm talking about a world that needs us to pay more attention to it and each other if we intend to succeed and leave a better place for the next generation, for our children. It's inconceivable right here in New York. A few months ago, there was like shooting sprees. Almost every day, someone was getting, kids were shooting other kids outside of school. Walking up to a child. I mean, I saw a video somewhere, I think it was in the Bronx, where the guy walked up to the island right behind their head and pulled the trigger. A kid, I think the kid they said that did it was 14 years old. I know that a lot of my audience are very mature and sensible people. I believe all of you are. I know many of you personally. I know of your occupations, your accomplishments in life, your accolades. I know that you come from a certain breed that in despite what society and this environment and the world is trying to do to you, you struggle hard to stand up and stand out as someone with dignity and respect and honor. And I know, therefore, it's inconceivable for you, as it is for me, to understand how a 14-year-old child can take a gun, walk up to the back of another child's head and pull the trigger. At that point, has to know, based on everything that's in the news and media, everything else, that that is a kill shot, or the intention is. Whether it accomplishes is one thing, but that's the intention. When did we get to the point where life had no value? And when did we get to the point where a 14-year-old child is brave enough to shoot another child in the head? And a lot of these children are not orphans. They have parents. Parents who should be training them and teaching them better, but are, who actually live lives that support the same lifestyle. Parents who set examples at home that encourage this kind of behavior. Parents who are the side of parents where if the child has a beef, as they call it, and it's a beef with firearms, he can go home and get daddy, and daddy's going to join the beef with his firearm too. What is wrong with us? How many of you who hear my voice and hear my frustration feel the same way? I know there are enough of you that you want to make a difference, that you are disgusted and tired of how we are killing our children, our relatives, our families, how we are destroying the mere foundation and essence of who we are as human beings. Over what? He stepped on my sneaker. He dated or disrespected my girl. He's dating someone my ex. These are the stupid things that people are killing each other for. Yes, there's the gang-related things and all that, but even the gang-related thing, how can the initiation in a gang and what is the concept of? And I'm sorry, I know this might not sound like a logical question because it seems the answers are out there, but I can't process it. How you join a gang that's supposed to be your family, right? Your gang family. So you join that and you have so-called support, but in order to join that, you got to go kill someone. What do you expect your life to be when you do this? But more so, how many more 14-year-olds are we going to lose? What happened between the day they were a bubbling, bouncing baby that you couldn't wait for them to say their first words? That when they said dada or mama, you weren't sure if they said it or not, but as parents, you claimed to fame that they said daddy or mommy first. That you would have kicked yourself if you missed the first time that they walked or they stood up and tried to walk. You held their hands and took them to daycare, and to primary school, to kindergarten, to elementary school. You fed them when they were learning to eat. You cleaned them. You changed their diapers. You held them when they were crying. You struggled with them when they were crying inconsolably because they had gas. Babies get gas, right? You stayed up all night to nourish this child. You went out and you took half your paycheck and bought clothes and nice shoes and whatever you call it because you were so proud of this child. And then the child gets to be 13 or 14 years old, and you throw him to the wolves, and you say, now it's time for you to belong to a gang, knowing fully well that you basically signed the death sentence of your child, because eventually, whatever you do in this world comes back to haunt you. And if the child is a killer, as this year are 200 mass shootings and all the other individual shootings that are probably in the thousands already this year, it's a war. And one day your son shoots someone, and the next day someone shoots him. I have a friend of mine, I always call my biggest supporter of the podcast, and I thank him so much for his support. He and I we have ongoing or on and off discussions, but at one point we had a lengthy, went on for days conversation about the Second Amendment and gun rights. He believes we should completely abolish the Second Amendment. I don't agree. I'm someone who believes that every gun owner should have a permit. Every gun owner should have a mental health check. And I see that from the perspective of someone myself who holds several licenses in firearms security, firearm training, range safety officer, all those things. But I don't believe that right to bear arms is being executed in a manner that's safe and advantageous for most of society. I understand why the people who vehemently oppose things like licensing, etc., do so. They do so because of the exact things I've been speaking to you earlier about in this podcast. They can't trust the government. You can't trust that when you say to the government, okay, you know what? Yes, we'll be licensed so you know what we have. You allow us to have it. As long as we're law-abiding citizens, we never shot anyone, well, at least not other than self-defense. You'll leave us alone. No. The reason that there's this such a huge divide between the two sides and they struggle to come together is because on the pro-gun side, there's such distrust for government, because it is proven history that once government starts to take, they keep taking. And when government promises one thing, that promise is not worth the paper it's signed on. And because the two sides are so far apart and hate each other so much, with politics right in the middle, we can't get to a place where we can protect our kids and our parents and our siblings and our friends and family and coworkers. We can't. Because we can't set up a criteria to keep us safe in this society. Now, I told my friend who talked about the Second Amendment and abolishing it and all that, this is a country, America is a country of freedom. It's a country that was founded on certain principles, and guns were always a part of that, right? So there's probably absolutely no way of getting rid of guns in America at this point. There's hundreds of millions of them out there. But the bottom line is nobody wants to pay attention to certain facts, and that is most law-abiding. I forgot, it's like a 0.03% of firearm shootings occur by the hands of law-abiding citizens. This is a fact. It's part of, I think I read it on was it ATF statistics, DOJ. It's in several forums. The fact is that people who like competition shooting and sport shooting and whatever pride themselves in being able to do that. And they don't do things to jeopardize, like doing foolish things like going out and letting your son get a hold of your gun to go shoot his friend in the head or his ex-friend on a pavement in New York. I'm giving you both sides of the coin because maybe if you start thinking about both sides, you can help me promote some common solution, and we can discuss it here, we can broadcast it here, we can share it from here, that starts the conversation or gets it back on track. There's so many things we are struggling with as human beings, as citizens of the United States of America. And I am telling you, if you sit and listen to the politics on the internet, in social media, on CNN and Fox and all that, it has nothing to do with you or me, no matter what party you belong to. These are people who we elect, who the day after we elect them feel powerful and empowered because they are there now. Even if their intentions were good when they started out, they become enthralled in in the power and the Secret Service and the money and the perks, and they become part of the establishment that's fighting each other and destroying us, the citizens of this country. They're not there anymore to make a difference in our lives. I talked about in the last two episodes about autism and the struggle it is to get help. We hear all the politicians talking about money for child this and child that, but when do the people who actually need it see the benefits of these rules and laws? And every single thing one party puts up, the other party automatically seems to oppose it in 99% of the cases, even if our position doesn't make sense. Forgive me if I sound like I'm pleading and I'm begging, but I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I'm disappointed. I have adjectives to describe me that I don't know where to find them from about how we have become as human beings. And one of the biggest crimes is killing each other, shooting each other, upset with someone because they're black, upset with someone because they're a person of color, upset with someone because they're not your color, upset with someone because they cut you off in traffic, in many cases not even realizing they cut you off, or they were rushing to go somewhere and didn't pay full attention and didn't see you in the window mirror. How does something like that end up in you being shot? How does a kid ringing your doorbell validate you or support the response of shooting through the door to in an attempt, obviously hitting him in the head and the elbow, to kill that kid? How does kids running on your front lawn solicit a response of shooting them? How does your neighbor coming over and saying, hey, there's a gun-free state or whatever, you're shooting and it's really loud. I got a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old kid inside sleeping. Could you keep it down? And they go back and you come over and shoot 8 people or whatever in the house and kill 5 of them, including children. Who are we? I don't know how many of you who listen to my podcast believe in God, but I'll tell you this right now. God did not create these monsters. Or at least, obviously, he created these monsters because he created all of us. But my point is, he didn't create us to be monsters. He gave us freedom of choice, and look what some of us are choosing. How do you go home at night, curl up in your bed, put your blanket on a cool fall or a winter night or a spring night, and go to sleep peacefully knowing that before you went to bed, you had to wash blood off your hands and burn your clothes because you have the blood of someone whose brains are now littering a sidewalk? How do you go home knowing that you went to a school and you shot 9 kids? How do you go home where you went to a nightclub where people were celebrating and opened fire in a nightclub? What is wrong with us? And how do we somehow stop this degradation of our brain cells that's turning us into worse than the creatures that we're supposed to be superior to? I know in this conversation I spoke about something's political, but I'm not having the political conversation really tonight. Those are things I couldn't avoid, so I had to mention them. But I want to have the human being conversation. The buck starts and stops with us. I've often said on this podcast that if we recognize the power we have as people, black, white, green, blue, libertarian, democratic, Republican, independent, whatever, if we decided that before we go to promoting our ideologies, let's promote humankind first. Let's join forces, do what they have done in other countries, and use the power of our numbers to demand government to do the right thing for us. Let's get to the point where we tell them what we need them to work on and give them deadlines to get it done. There's I guess there's a senator or 2 Congress people. I'm not exactly sure, but I heard the news today where a Democrat and Republican in our government came together to sponsor a bill that says basically if the members of Congress don't do their job, they don't get paid. That's the best bill I ever heard. It should be signed without a hearing. You know why? It doesn't need a hearing. Because if you and I, who go to work every day and work for every dime we have that sometimes can't make ends meet, if we don't do our job, we get fired. There's no bill needed to pass that. Then they are employees of us, the people. They work for us. And therefore, not only should they not get paid, but maybe we need to start changing laws that make them recognize that we can fire them too. And then maybe we need to work on each other and find a common ground so when we have situations where we need to act together, we can unite and act together. The minute we stop allowing our government officials to behave like fools, they'll stop behaving like fools. The minute we demand that they focus on us first and their petty nonsense in their own privacy of their homes, they'll stop. But as long as they see it, they can keep us divided, keep us angry at each other, keep promoting racism, hate, supremacy, all these things by poking the bear, by pulling the pin on the grenade and dropping it into these buckets of hatred and stirring it up and then walking away knowing that they don't even need to stir it because once they drop the grenade, we do the stirring for them. The minute they realize that simply spreading or planting two strategically placed lies, one in one party and one in the other party, can cause such hatred and anger against each other in the parties that we're completely distracted from what the common goal is. They have found the magic pill to keep their power and do as they like without any consequences from us. They've found our kryptonite. Aren't you tired of the mass shootings? Aren't you tired of the excuses of the people we elect who can't seem to solve anything and simply decide that since they can't find common ground, they just ignore it and move on? If this conversation doesn't matter to you now, I hope you never have to experience having someone in your family being a victim or you yourself being a victim of a shooting. I pray that you will feel where I'm coming from and you will find a few moments of your days, of maybe parts of each day, to start finding ways to spread the message. I thank all of those people who've been subscribing and who've been spreading this podcast. It's not easy sharing these types of messages because my podcast doesn't garner the popularity of a superstar who comes out and says, oh, I'm going to start a podcast on Monday, and all of a sudden they get 1 million views. It's easy to look at the fun stuff and use the remote that you do on TV and ignore the channels you don't want to listen to. Because a channel like 247 Real Talk Podcast can be painful, but it is real. And if we want to make a difference, if we want the value of our lives to count, then we need real talk, real action, real solutions. And we can only do that if we decide to be real people. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of 247 Real Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Perry, and it's been my pleasure. Please, I have the YouTube version of this. I have the audio version of this podcast that you can listen to on any of your favorite podcast apps. It's on almost every one. If you go to YouTube, please do me a favor, subscribe, and then share the podcast. If you share it to 10, 20, 30 people, maybe 2 people will listen. Maybe 2 people will be caught up in the conversation and become part of the group of change. 1 person at a time, 2 people at a time, 10 people at a time. I've dedicated the last 3 years and the last 100, this is 152 episodes now, to making a difference. And I'm just getting started. You can help me by helping my journey grow. And you can help me by making a difference so I can start doing things like funding campaigns for change and actually effecting change. Have a great weekend and a great week ahead. Be blessed. Be good to each other. Take care of yourselves. And please do take care of each other.